Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. It is a uniquely unsettling fear, the one that whispers of danger not in the shadowy alley or the abandoned house, but in the face of a smiling stranger. We are taught from a young age to recognize threats, to profile danger through a series of archetypes etched into our collective consciousness. The lurking figure, the unkempt transient, the face contorted by rage. These are the monsters we are prepared for. But what happens when the monster looks just like everyone else? What happens when the monster looks better than everyone else? When he is handsome, articulate, educated, and charming? What happens when the monster is the man you would invite into your home, the man you would ask for help, the man you might even fall in love with? This is the central horror of the Ted Bundy case. It's a story that transcends the grim calculus of victim counts and timelines, lodging itself deep in our cultural psyche because it attacks our most fundamental tools of survival, trust and intuition. It suggests that the social contract, the very thing that allows us to live together in communities, can be weaponized, that kindness can be a lure, a smile can be a mask, and charisma can be the most effective camouflage a predator has ever worn. For years, a specter haunted the Pacific Northwest, then the Mountain West, and finally the sun-drenched coasts of Florida. It left behind a trail of missing women, grieving families, and terrified communities. And all the while, the man responsible was moving among them, his darkness perfectly concealed by a dazzling veneer of normalcy. Today, we are not just recounting a timeline of atrocities. We are performing a dissection. We are peeling back the layers of a carefully constructed identity to understand how it was built, how it functioned, and why it was so catastrophically effective. We will explore how a boy born into a world of secrets and shame meticulously crafted a persona designed to win the world's approval, even as he waged a secret war against it. This is the story of a killer who used society's own biases and expectations as his greatest weapon. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we explore the anatomy of charisma as camouflage. To understand the mask, you must first understand the man who made it. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His birth itself was shrouded in the kind of deep, suffocating secret that defined mid-century American propriety. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was a smart, attractive young woman from a devoutly religious Philadelphia family. The identity of his biological father remains a subject of debate, a ghost in the narrative. The most prominent theory points to a man named Lloyd Marshall, an Air Force veteran, but Bundy himself would later spin darker, more sensational tales, hinting at his own grandfather, the tyrannical Samuel Cowell, as his progenitor. This uncertainty, this void at the very core of his identity, became the first crack in the foundation of the man he would become. To shield the family from the shame of an illegitimate child, a lie was concocted. A lie so profound it would warp Ted's entire childhood. He was brought home to Philadelphia and raised as the adopted son of his grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell. His own mother, Louise, was presented to him as his older sister. Imagine the psychological labyrinth of that upbringing. The person who is your biological mother, the source of your existence, is introduced as a sibling. The people you call mom and dad are, in fact, your grandparents. It was a household built on a fiction, governed by Samuel Cowell, a man described by many as a violent, bigoted racist who was abusive to his wife, his children, and even the family dog. Young Ted was a witness to this domestic ugliness, all while navigating the unspoken, confusing truth of his own parentage. He was reportedly a solitary child, shy and withdrawn. Neighbors would later recall seeing him peering into their windows late at night. By his own account, he was fascinated with macabre imagery, poring over detective magazines and true crime stories, particularly those that featured gruesome violence and images of dead or mutilated women. He claimed his first exposure to pornography came from scavenging through local dumpsters, finding magazines that fused sex with violence, planting what he would later call the seeds of his pathology. While these claims were made late in his life, as he was attempting to explain or excuse his actions, they paint a picture of a mind already turning towards the darkness. When Ted was 4, his mother, still playing the role of his sister, fled the oppressive family home in Philadelphia. She took Ted with her, moving across the country to Tacoma, Washington, to live with cousins. It was here that she met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook. They married in 1951, and Johnny adopted Ted, giving him the surname that would become infamous around the world. On the surface, it was a chance at a normal life. The family grew, with Louise and Johnny having 4 children of their own. They were a church-going, working-class family striving for the American dream. But for Ted, the charade of his birth was a wound that never healed. He eventually pieced together the truth of his parentage, and the revelation only deepened his sense of alienation and resentment. He felt a profound disconnect from his stepfather and younger siblings. He was an outsider in his own home, the product of a secret shame that he felt marked him as different, as fraudulent. This internal conflict manifested in his external persona. As he moved into his teenage years, he began to consciously build a new version of himself. He was no longer the shy, awkward boy. He became driven, ambitious, and obsessed with projecting an image of success and respectability. He learned to mimic the behaviors of the people he admired, the confident, the popular, the powerful. He dressed impeccably. He became active in school politics. He learned to smile, to charm, to say all the right things. He was creating the mask piece by piece, polishing it until it gleamed. Yet, beneath the surface the darkness was festering. He engaged in petty theft, shoplifting ski equipment, and other items that represented the affluent lifestyle he craved but felt he could not rightfully attain. He was a voyeur, a peeping Tom, spending his nights peering into the windows of unsuspecting neighbors, a rehearsal for the more invasive and violent intrusions to come. A key chapter in the formation of his predatory psyche came during his time at the University of Washington. There he met a young woman who would come to embody everything he both desired and despised. Her name is often given as Stephanie Brooks in true crime literature, a pseudonym to protect her privacy. She was wealthy, beautiful, and sophisticated, the perfect symbol of the upper-crust world he desperately wanted to join. They dated for a time, but she ultimately broke up with him, citing his immaturity and lack of direction. For Bundy, this rejection was catastrophic. It was a confirmation of his deepest insecurities, a judgment that he was not good enough. The rage and humiliation he felt would simmer for years, and many criminal profilers believe that Stephanie Brooks became the unwilling prototype for his future victims, attractive, intelligent young women with long, dark hair parted in the middle. The breakup seemed to galvanize him. He threw himself into his studies, became more involved in politics, and even traveled to the East Coast to attend Temple University for a semester before returning to Washington. He was honing his performance, becoming more adept at playing the part of the successful young man. He re-enrolled at the University of Washington, this time majoring in psychology. He got a job at a suicide crisis hotline, working side by side with a woman named Anne Rule, a former police officer who was writing true crime articles on the side. She found him to be empathetic, intelligent, and a dedicated colleague. She saw no hint of the monster lurking within. He was, by all accounts, an exemplary employee, talking people down from the brink of despair. The irony is staggering. A man who would one day cause so much death was, for a time, in the business of saving lives. It was the perfect cover, a testament to his chilling ability to compartmentalize his life. In the early 1970s, Bundy's mask was nearly perfect. He was a rising star in local Republican politics, working on the re-election campaign of Washington Governor Daniel Evans. He was respected by his peers, who saw him as a bright and ambitious future leader. He even reinitiated contact with Stephanie Brooks, the woman who had rejected him years earlier. This time, he was the man he thought she wanted him to be, confident, successful, with a clear plan for the future. He charmed her completely. They rekindled their relationship, and he even talked of marriage. Then, after proving to himself that he could conquer her, that he could have the woman who once deemed him unworthy, he abruptly and coldly cut her off, just as she had done to him years before. It was an act of calculated psychological revenge, a demonstration of power and control, and with that conquest complete, the stage was set for his rage to escalate from emotional cruelty to lethal violence. He had perfected his camouflage, and now he was ready to begin his hunt. The year 1974 began with a chill in the Pacific Northwest that had little to do with the winter weather. A quiet, creeping fear was beginning to take hold on college campuses across Washington and Oregon. Young women were disappearing. They were vanishing from their dorm rooms, from well-lit streets, from bustling campus centers. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses to an abduction, no ransom notes. They were simply there one moment and gone the next. The disappearances were disparate enough at first to seem like isolated incidents, the tragic but unconnected misfortunes of young women choosing to run away or falling victim to random acts of violence. But soon, the pattern became undeniable and terrifyingly clear. The victims were all remarkably similar. Young, bright, attractive college students with long hair, usually parted in the middle. They were the daughters of good families, the students with promising futures, the kind of women who didn't just vanish without a trace. The first widely recognized victim in this emerging series was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old University of Washington student who majored in psychology. In the early morning hours of February 1, 1974, she disappeared from her basement bedroom in a shared house near campus. Her roommate noticed her bed had been neatly made, which was unusual, but her backpack was packed for the day and her bicycle was gone. It was as if she had simply gotten up and left for her morning radio broadcast shift at a local ski report. But she never arrived. The only sign that something was amiss was a small spot of blood on her pillow. A month later, on March 12, 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson, a student at Evergreen State College in Olympia, left her dorm to attend a jazz concert on campus. She was never seen again. On April 17th, Susan Elaine Rincourt, a student at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg, vanished after a late-night dorm advisors meeting. Friends saw her walk off into the night, and she was gone. The disappearances continued, each one a carbon copy of the last. Roberta Kathleen Parks left her dorm at Oregon State University on May 6th. Brenda Carol Ball, a 22-year-old, vanished from the Flame Tavern in Burien, a suburb of Seattle, on June 1st. Jorgen Hawkins, an 18-year-old University of Washington student, disappeared from a brightly lit alley behind her sorority house on June 11th. She was on crutches, recovering from a minor bicycle accident, and was last seen talking to a man near a fraternity house. Law enforcement agencies were baffled. They were dealing with a type of criminal they had never encountered before. The crime scenes, if you could even call them that, were pristine. There was no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no fibers, no witnesses to a struggle. The killer was like a phantom, moving through their communities with an unnatural stealth. He was organized, he was careful, and he was intelligent. He left nothing behind but a growing sense of dread. Police from different jurisdictions began to communicate, sharing notes and realizing the disappearances were almost certainly connected. They were hunting for a serial killer, though the term was not yet in common public parlor. They were looking for a single, methodical predator responsible for a growing wave of terror. All the while, Ted Bundy moved through this same world, not as a suspect, but as a concerned citizen. He was studying law at the University of Puget Sound. He was still involved in Republican politics. Ann Rule, his friend from the crisis hotline, was now working on a book about the very murders he was committing. She would occasionally talk to him about the case, and he would offer his psychological insights, speculating on the kind of person who could commit such crimes. He was hiding in the one place no one would ever think to look, in plain sight, disguised as one of them. His mask of normalcy was his shield. He was handsome, articulate, and drove a modest Volkswagen Beetle. He was the friendly face you'd see on campus, the helpful stranger, the good neighbor. He was utterly, terrifyingly invisible. The killer's audacity reached its zenith on a hot summer day, July 14, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park, a popular recreation area bustling with families and sunbathers. On that single afternoon, 2 young women would be abducted from the crowded park in broad daylight. The method was pure, predatory genius, a masterclass in exploiting social conventions. A handsome young man, his arm in a fake sling, approached multiple women throughout the day. He introduced himself as Ted. He was polite, charming, and struggling to load a sailboat onto his car, a tan or bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. He asked for help. It was a simple, non-threatening request, a plea for assistance from an attractive, seemingly injured man. First, he approached Janice Ann Ott, a 23-year-old juvenile court probation officer. She was seen helping the man with the sailboat before walking away with him towards the parking lot. She was never seen alive again. Just a few hours later, in the same park, the same man used the same ruse. This time, he approached Denise Marie Naslund, a 19-year-old who was there with her boyfriend and another couple. She left her friends to go to the restroom and vanished. Later, witnesses would recall seeing her talking to a handsome man with his arm in a sling. The Lake Sammamish abductions were a watershed moment in the investigation. For the first time, there were multiple witnesses who had seen and spoken to the suspect. They gave police a name, Ted, and a consistent description. Handsome, charismatic, in his mid to late 20s, with an arm in a sling, driving a VW Beetle. A composite sketch was drawn up and circulated throughout the state. Ann Rule saw the sketch and the description. It sounded like her friend, Ted Bundy, but she dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it came. It was impossible. Ted was kind, gentle, and her friend. He wasn't a monster. Ted Bundy's girlfriend at the time, Elizabeth Klopfer, often known by the pseudonym Elizabeth Kendall, also saw the sketch and read about the case. A cold dread washed over her. The description matched Ted. The car matched Ted. He had been known to have crutches and slings in his possession with no apparent injury. She wrestled with her suspicions, her love for the man she knew battling against a terrifying intuition. She called the police, not once but several times, giving them Ted Bundy's name. But the police were inundated with thousands of tips, and Ted Bundy just didn't fit the profile of a vicious killer. He was a law student. He had letters of recommendation from the governor. He had no significant criminal record. He was vetted, and, in a catastrophic failure of imagination, he was dismissed as a potential suspect. His camouflage had worked perfectly. The very qualities that should have made him stand out, his ambition, his intelligence, his polished exterior, made him seem an unlikely candidate for the brutal crimes they were investigating. In September of 1974, 2 months after the Lake Sammamish abductions, the remains of Janice Ott and Denise Naslund were found by hunters on a remote wooded hillside miles from the park. A third set of remains, later believed to be those of Jorgen Hawkins, was also nearby. The discovery confirmed the community's worst fears. This wasn't just a case of missing persons. It was the work of a brutal, sadistic killer. But by the time this discovery was made, the phantom had already moved on. Ted Bundy had been accepted to the University of Utah College of Law in Salt Lake City. He packed up his belongings, left Seattle in his unassuming Volkswagen Beetle, and drove south, taking his insatiable hunger with him. The Pacific Northwest breathed a collective, albeit premature, sigh of relief. The disappearances stopped as suddenly as they had begun. They didn't know that the monster hadn't been caught. He had just relocated. In the autumn of 1974, Salt Lake City, Utah, was a world away from the pervasive fear that had gripped Seattle. It was a community that felt safe, insulated by its conservative culture and strong community ties. But the monster that had terrorized Washington had now arrived, and he brought his methods with him. Ted Bundy settled into his new life as a law student at the University of Utah, and almost immediately, young women in the surrounding areas began to disappear. The pattern was hauntingly familiar. On October 2, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox vanished in Holiday, a suburb of Salt Lake City. A witness reported seeing her get into a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle. On October 18th, Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of the police chief in Midvale, Utah, disappeared after leaving a pizza parlor. Her naked body was found 9 days later in the rugged terrain of Wasatch National Forest. She had been brutally beaten and strangled. Just a few weeks later, on Halloween night, 17-year-old Laura Amy disappeared from the streets of Lehi, Utah. Her body was discovered nearly a month later, not far from where Melissa Smith's had been found. The local police were now facing the same nightmare that had unfolded in the Pacific Northwest. An invisible predator was in their midst, hunting their daughters. And then, on November 8th, the killer made a mistake. He grew bold, and in his boldness, he left behind something he never had before, a living witness who could identify him. That evening, 18-year-old Carol Duranch was shopping at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. A handsome, well-dressed man approached her. He identified himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department and told her that someone had been seen trying to break into her car. He asked her to accompany him to the parking lot to check the vehicle. Duranch was initially hesitant, but the man was persuasive and authoritative. He had an air of officialdom about him. He showed her a badge. She agreed to go with him. When they reached her car and found nothing amiss, he told her she needed to come with him to the police station to file a report. She got into his car, a Volkswagen Beetle. As they drove, the man's behavior became increasingly strange. He failed to turn towards the police station and instead headed for a darker, more remote area. He pulled over near an elementary school, and suddenly, the mask of Officer Roseland dropped. He tried to handcuff her. A frantic struggle ensued. Bundy, for it was him, managed to snap one handcuff onto her wrist, but Duranche fought back with a ferocity he did not anticipate. She was fighting for her life. She managed to get her door open and scrambled out of the car, running screaming into the headlights of an oncoming vehicle. Her attacker, stunned by her resistance, sped away into the night. Carol Duranche was terrified and bruised, but she was alive. She had seen his face, she had been inside his car, and she would never forget either. Incredibly, just a few hours after his failed attempt to abduct Carol Duranche, Bundy struck again. He drove to Bountiful, Utah, a town just north of Salt Lake City. There, he abducted 17-year-old Deborah Kent as she was leaving a play at Viewmont High School to pick up her brother. Witnesses saw her get into a Volkswagen Beetle. Her car keys and a single handcuff key, which police would later link to the cuff on Carol Duranche's wrist, were found in the school parking lot. Deborah Kent's body would not be found for years. The link between the Duranche abduction attempt and the Kent disappearance was undeniable. The police now had a solid description of the suspect and his vehicle, but Bundy remained elusive. He continued his studies, a seemingly normal law student by day, a relentless predator by night. His hunting ground expanded into Colorado. In January 1975, Corinne Campbell, a 23-year-old nurse, on a ski vacation in Snowmass, vanished from the hallway of her hotel. Her body was found a month later, buried in a snowbank. In the following months, two more young women, Julie Cunningham and Denise Oliverson, would disappear in Colorado. The net, however, was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to close. Detectives in Washington, Utah, and Colorado were now sharing information, convinced they were all hunting the same man. The name Ted Bundy, provided months earlier by his girlfriend Elizabeth Klopfer, was still buried in a pile of tips in Washington. But in Utah, police were zeroing in on Volkswagen Beetles. The break came not from a brilliant piece of detective work, but from a stroke of luck and the sharp instincts of a single patrol officer. In the early morning hours of August 16, 1975, Utah Highway Patrol Sergeant Bob Hayward was patrolling a residential area in Granger, a suburb of Salt Lake City. He saw a tan VW Beetle parked in front of a house with its lights off. As his patrol car approached, the VW sped away. Hayward, his suspicions aroused, gave chase. He pulled the driver over. The man behind the wheel was clean-cut, polite, and handsome. His name was Ted Bundy. Bundy gave a plausible story about being a law student who was lost and had pulled over to get his bearings. But Hayward was unnerved by him. He decided to search the vehicle. Inside, he found a crowbar, a box of large green garbage bags, an ice pick, a flashlight, a pair of handcuffs, a ski mask, and a pantyhose mask with eye holes cut out. It was a predator's toolkit. Bundy was arrested for evading an officer and possession of burglary tools. It was a minor charge, but it was enough. Ted Bundy was finally in the system. Carol Duranche was brought in for a lineup. She looked at the row of men, and her eyes locked on suspect number 5. The face was thinner, the hair different, but it was him. She identified Ted Bundy as the man who had tried to abduct her. The subsequent investigation was a slow, painstaking process of connecting the dots. Elizabeth Klopfer, seeing Bundy's name in the newspaper after his arrest, called the police again, this time providing more detailed and damning information about his suspicious activities, and a list of items she had found in his apartment that matched things missing from some of the crime scenes. Police were able to place Bundy's gas card receipts in the vicinity of several abductions in Utah and Colorado. The crucial piece of physical evidence came from Karen Campbell's body in Colorado. Forensic scientists found unusual hairs on her body that were microscopically consistent with hair from Ted Bundy. In February 1976, Ted Bundy went on trial in Salt Lake City for the aggravated kidnapping of Carol Durant. He was the picture of confidence, a handsome law student wrongly accused. He waived his right to a jury trial, placing his fate in the hands of a single judge, perhaps believing his charm would be more effective on one person than on 12. But the evidence, particularly Carol Durant's powerful and unwavering testimony, was overwhelming. Judge Stuart Hansen Jr. found him guilty. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. For the public, it seemed like the end of the nightmare. The handsome law student was just a kidnapper, and he was behind bars. But for the detectives in multiple states, it was only the beginning. They were convinced he was responsible for dozens of murders, and they began the process of building a capital murder case against him. Starting with the death of Karen Campbell in Colorado. In late 1976, Bundy was extradited to Aspen, Colorado, to face trial for her murder. Believing himself to be smarter than any of his lawyers, he decided to act as his own co-counsel. This decision granted him certain privileges, including access to the courthouse law library, without being shackled. The system, once again, was treating him not as a dangerous killer, but as an educated man of the law. It would prove to be a near-fatal mistake. On June 7, 1977, during a preliminary hearing at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Ted Bundy saw his chance. While in the courthouse library, ostensibly to research his case, he asked the guard if he could open a window for some fresh air. The guard, seeing no threat from the clean-cut law student, agreed. Bundy walked to the open window, looked down 2 stories to the ground below, and jumped. He landed in some bushes, sprained his ankle, and hobbled away into the mountains surrounding the town. The escape of a man now suspected of being one of the most prolific serial killers in American history triggered a massive manhunt. Law enforcement, volunteers, and tracking dogs scoured the rugged terrain around Aspen. Roadblocks were set up on all major highways. Bundy, however, was resourceful. He broke into a vacant cabin, stealing food and supplies. For 6 days he managed to elude capture, living off the land and his wits, but he was not a skilled outdoorsman. Cold, hungry, and in pain from his ankle injury, he eventually made his way back towards town. He stole a car but was spotted by police. After a short chase, he was pulled over and recaptured. His grand escape had lasted less than a week. His return to custody was a humiliation, but it did not break his resolve. He was now being held in what was supposed to be a more secure facility, the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs. But Bundy immediately began probing for weaknesses, planning his next escape with the patience of a true predator. He discovered that the ceiling in his cell was made of soft plaster. Over the course of several months, using a hacksaw blade he had either found or acquired, he painstakingly sawed a 1-foot square hole in the ceiling above his bunk. He concealed his work with books and papers. He had also managed to lose a significant amount of weight, allowing him to squeeze his body through the narrow opening. On the night of December 30, 1977, with most of the jail staff off for the holidays, Bundy put his plan into action. He climbed through the hole in his ceiling into the crawlspace above. He navigated through the maze of pipes and ducts until he found his way into the apartment of the chief jailer, which was empty for the night. There, he changed into civilian clothes he had stolen from the jailer's closet, and simply walked out the front door into the snowy Colorado night. He was free, and this time he would not be caught so easily. The jail staff did not discover he was missing for more than 17 hours, giving him a massive head start. Bundy made his way to Denver, caught a bus to Chicago, and then a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan. He stole a car and drove south, his destination a place where no one knew his name or his face, a place where he could reinvent himself, and more importantly, a place where he could kill again. He arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, in early January 1978, renting a room in a boarding house near the Florida State University campus, under the alias Chris Hagen. The mask of Ted Bundy, the charming law student, was gone. What was left was a raw, unrestrained rage, a desperate and depraved hunger that had been caged for too long. The final, most brutal chapter of his reign of terror was about to begin. In the pre-dawn hours of January 15, 1978, just over 2 weeks after his escape, Bundy unleashed a storm of violence that was different from anything he had done before. The careful, methodical planning of his earlier crimes gave way to a frenzied, explosive rage. He broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Moving from room to room in the sleeping house, he bludgeoned 4 young women with a piece of oak firewood he had picked up from a stack outside. He attacked them in their beds as they slept. 2 of the women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, were killed. The other 2, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, were left with devastating, life-altering injuries. Bundy spent less than 15 minutes inside the house. In that brief window, he committed acts of unspeakable brutality, leaving behind a chaotic and bloody crime scene. On Lisa Levy's body, investigators found a distinctive double bite mark, a piece of forensic evidence that would prove to be his undoing. After leaving the sorority house, his bloodlust was still not sated. He walked several blocks and broke into a basement apartment where he attacked another FSU student, Cheryl Thomas. He beat her so severely that she was left with a broken jaw, a shattered skull, and permanent hearing loss. The city of Tallahassee awoke to a scene of horror unlike any it had ever known. A monster was loose on their campus, a killer of terrifying ferocity. The police had few leads. The attacker had been a ghost, leaving behind a maelstrom of violence, but little else. They had no idea that the man they were looking for was one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. Bundy laid low for a few weeks, but his compulsions were too strong to control. On February 9th, he abducted his final victim, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, a junior high school student from Lake City, Florida, disappeared from her school in the middle of the day. Bundy had lured her into a stolen white van. Her disappearance sparked a massive search, but it was too late. Bundy had driven her to a remote, abandoned pigsty in Sewanee River State Park, where he murdered her. Her partially buried remains would not be found for nearly 2 months. By this point, Bundy was unraveling. The cool, confident chameleon was gone, replaced by a desperate, erratic fugitive. He was running out of money and options. On February 15th, just 6 days after he killed Kimberly Leach, a police officer in Pensacola, Florida, near the Alabama border, spotted a suspicious orange Volkswagen Beetle parked in a residential area late at night. The officer, David Lee, ran the license plate and discovered the car was stolen. He approached the vehicle. The driver was Ted Bundy. When Officer Lee tried to arrest him, Bundy fought back and a violent struggle ensued, Lee managed to subdue Bundy, finally and definitively ending his cross-country reign of terror. When he was arrested, Bundy initially refused to give his name, but the authorities quickly realized who they had in custody. The handsome, charming law student was now a gaunt, disheveled, and wanted man. The evidence linking him to the Florida crimes was overwhelming. At the Chi Omega crime scene, he had left behind semen stains and the crucial bite mark evidence on Lisa Levy's body. Forensic odontologists made a mold of Bundy's teeth with their distinctively chipped and crooked alignment, and found it was a perfect match to the bite marks. It was a novel form of forensic evidence at the time, and it tied him directly to the murder. Bundy's trial for the Chi Omega murders began in Miami in the summer of 1979. It was a media circus, one of the first major trials to be nationally televised, and Bundy, ever the narcissist, relished the spotlight. He once again insisted on playing a major role in his own defense, cross-examining witnesses and making legal arguments. He was arrogant, charming, and utterly delusional, seemingly believing he could talk his way out of anything. In a bizarre and surreal moment during the trial, he took advantage of an obscure Florida law that stated a marriage declaration in open court constituted a legal marriage. While questioning his former girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, who had moved to Florida to support him, he asked her to marry him. She accepted, and in that moment, in the middle of his own capital murder trial, they were married. But the theatrics could not overcome the mountain of evidence against him. The eyewitness testimony from the surviving Chi Omega victims, the forensic evidence, and especially the bite mark analysis, sealed his fate. On July 24, 1979, the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of burglary. As the verdict was read, Bundy's mask of calm finally cracked, revealing the snarling rage beneath. The judge, Edward Coward, in a now famous sentencing statement, seemed to speak to the tragic duality of the man before him. He told Bundy, "It is ordered that you be put to death by a current of electricity. Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It is a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity." A second trial followed in 1980 for the murder of Kimberly Leach. Once again, Bundy was convicted and given a 3rd death sentence. He spent the next 9 years on Florida's death row, endlessly appealing his convictions, all the while maintaining his innocence. He was a celebrity prisoner, receiving fan mail and interview requests. He continued to play the role of the wronged man, the victim of a vast conspiracy. But as his execution date drew near and all legal avenues were exhausted, the mask began to dissolve for good. In a final, desperate bid to postpone his death, he began to confess. He spoke at length with FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmaier and Detective Bob Keppel, the man who had hunted him in Washington State years earlier. In a series of chilling interviews, he finally dropped the facade and admitted to the string of murders that had baffled police for over a decade. He confessed to killing his victims in Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. He spoke of his methods, of the entity within him, the force that drove him to kill. He described decapitating some of his victims and keeping their heads as trophies. The full, horrifying scope of his depravity was finally laid bare. He ultimately confessed to 30 murders, but investigators believe the true number is likely much higher. On the morning of January 24, 1989, at the Florida State Prison, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Outside the prison walls, a crowd had gathered. They cheered and set off fireworks as the white hearse carrying his body drove away. The monster was dead. The long nightmare was finally over. So we return to our central question. How? How did one man fool so many people for so long? The answer lies in the very anatomy of his chosen camouflage. Ted Bundy was a predator who understood the power of performance. He did not fit the archetype of a monster, so society refused to see him as one. He weaponized our expectations. We expect killers to be ugly, socially awkward, and visibly disturbed. Bundy was handsome, articulate, and moved through the world with an easy confidence. He was a law student, a political operative, a crisis counselor. He wrapped himself in the cloak of respectability, and that cloak rendered him invisible to his prey, and, for a crucial period, to law enforcement. His charm was not a personality trait. It was a tool, as carefully selected and utilized as the crowbar in his car. He used it to disarm, to build trust, to lure women to their deaths. The cast on his arm, the sling, the feigned injury, these were not just tricks. They were brilliant pieces of psychological theater. They transformed him from a potential threat into a person in need of help, reversing the normal dynamic, and turning his victim's own compassion against them, even his own girlfriend, a woman who lived with him and loved him, could barely bring herself to believe the terrible truth her intuition was screaming at her. When she reported her suspicions to the police, she was met with skepticism. Ted Bundy, it seemed impossible. The Bundy case serves as a permanent, terrifying reminder that evil does not always announce itself. It does not always come with a warning sign. Sometimes it comes with a handsome face, a winning smile, and a promise of help. He exploited a fundamental vulnerability in our social fabric, our desire to believe that the world is as it appears, that people are who they seem to be. He proved that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who have mastered the art of blending in, the ones who know that the perfect hiding place is not in the shadows, but in the light. His legacy is not just the pain and loss he inflicted upon dozens of families, but a profound and lasting erosion of trust. He taught us a lesson we have never been able to unlearn, that the face of a friend and the face of a monster can be one and the same. The most chilling part of his story is not the evil he committed, but the ease with which he concealed it behind a mask of perfect, charming, and utterly believable humanity. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.